Effect. So I want to make sure I say here, and we'll get up to your viewing, is that if you're watching and you want to tweet along and you want to send in emails, you can tweet your questions using hashtag PDRUpdate, or email your questions to pdrquarterlyupdate@hud.gov, which are the vehicles that we always use. Okay, so as usual in our quarterlies, we're going to start off with Kevin Kane, PD&R Chief Market Analyst, who's going to give us an update on the housing markets focused on the fourth quarter of 2015. And as a special treat for us today and a little bit of a break from our typical quarterlies, we're going to be joined by HUD Secretary Julian Castro. And what Kevin Kane is going to do is magically make the timing of that work, either in the midst of his talk or at the end of his talk. And then we'll move into the panel discussion for the day. And today's conversation is about managing community change, a dialogue on gentrification. And actually, we chose to do this out of a particular interest the Secretary has in this moment in time in the country, where so many parts of the nation are talking about gentrification, right? So we're in the midst of a continued housing affordability crisis, on top of which some areas and neighborhoods are facing intense pressure. On a kind of hot topic, there's been debates on the prevalence of this, the amount of displacement, and whether or not when gentrification or community change occurs, the original residents get to benefit. Many of the communities that are facing this pressure desperately want to create and retain diversity in their communities. And so a frame we're going to take for today is thinking about how can we better maximize the potential benefits when communities experience this type of economic gain, such that original residents may benefit and we actually manage to sustain meaningful integration. And so we're going to focus both on the challenges and opportunities, and then flip also to thinking about what do we know about some best strategies and practices. And so I'm going to have us start off by turning to Kevin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. O'Regan. A lot of people ask me why they don't see me and the Secretary together more frequently. And it's kind of started a little bit of a rumor of, maybe like a Bruce Wayne kind of a Batman type situation, possibly. But it actually goes back. There's a little known clause in the Monroe Doctrine that talks about the handsome level on a stage. And it just turns out that when me and the Secretary are on stage together, it just pushes us over that limit. It's a little too much handsomeness on the stage. All right, so before I begin today, let me thank Randall Goodnight and Wendy Ip, who put together the maps that you'll see this afternoon in my presentation. As always with the maps, the colors indicate whether conditions are better off or worse off, where brown is worse off conditions or declines in a variable, blue is better conditions or increases. First, we're going to talk about the nation's economy, and then we'll look at the nation's sales and rental markets. In the first figure, we see the year-over-year percentage change in non-farm payroll since 2005. This is looking at both the 12-month and 3-month moving averages through December of 2015. Non-farm payrolls are a measure of the number of jobs in the economy. The 12-month average is shown in blue, and the 3-month average is shown in red. During the 12 months ending December 2015, non-farm payrolls averaged 142 million jobs. This is up 2.1%, or 3 million jobs, compared with a gain of 1.9% a year ago. The 3-month average through December is up at a slightly lower rate of 2%. Total job gains during the fourth quarter were led by the education and health services sector, which added nearly 700,000 jobs, an increase of 3.2%. The construction subsector had the highest rate of job growth, up by 4.4%, or 281,000 jobs. And employment in the mining and logging subsector was down nearly 14% from a year ago, or 126,000 jobs in response to declining energy prices. For the 19th consecutive quarter, every region in the country added jobs relative to a year ago, and the entire country is shown in blue. The year-over-year rate for the nation during the fourth quarter of 2015, again, was 2%, and that compares with 2.1% a year ago. The 3 regions in darker blue grew at a rate that was faster than the national average, and that includes the Southeast as well as the Western regions. Growth was strongest in the Pacific at 2.9%, and this was led by gains of 2.9% in both California and Arizona. Jobs in the San Francisco metropolitan area were up by 4.8%. This was the 9th fastest growing metropolitan area in the country. Growth in the Northwest remained strong, but fell below 3% for the first time in over a year. And compared with year-over-year rates of growth during the same quarter last year, the rates of growth were up in 6 regions and they were down in 4 regions. The largest gains relative to a year ago occurred in the Pacific, which was up from 2.2% a year ago to the current rate of 2.9%. The national unemployment rate was 4.8% during the fourth quarter. This was down from 5.5% a year ago. The 7 regions in blue had a rate that was less than the national average for the second consecutive quarter, led by the Rocky Mountains at 3.2%. The 3 regions in brown had a higher rate than the national average, led for the second quarter by the Pacific at 5.7%. And on a state level, rates ranged from a low of 2.3% in North Dakota to a high of 6.5% in Alaska, Mississippi, and here in the District of Columbia. On a national level, the unemployment rate was down 0.7 percentage points from last year. The unemployment rate declined in every region of the country, all in blue. The 2 regions in darker blue declined faster than the national average, led by New York, New Jersey, which was down by 1.1 percentage points. Unemployment rates declined in 44 states, including the District of Columbia, led by New Jersey with a decline of 1.6 percentage points. And let me give an overview of current housing market conditions. Sales housing markets remain relatively balanced throughout most of the country, with some areas of tightness. For a bit of background, balanced markets occur when the quantity of housing supplied equals the quantity demanded. Soft markets occur when the quantity of housing supplied exceeds the quantity demanded and we have a housing surplus. And tight markets occur when demand exceeds supply and we have a shortage. All 3 home price indices show that home sales prices continued to increase during the fourth quarter, with the rates of gain remaining relatively stable compared with the previous quarter. Home sales increased by 5% during the 12 months ending December 2015, and that's based on CoreLogic data. This is after an increase of 6% last quarter. Inventories of new homes for sale were up by 10% from a year ago, and they were down by 5% for existing homes. And based on the current rate of home sales, there's a 5.1 months supply of new homes. This is unchanged from a year ago. And there's a 3.9 months supply of existing homes. This is down from a 4.4 months supply a year ago, and the supply of existing homes continues to decline. The sales vacancy rate was 1.9% in the fourth quarter. That's unchanged from a year ago. All regions of the country have rental markets with tight or slightly tight conditions. 61% of apartments that were completed in the third quarter were absorbed in the fourth quarter, compared with a rate of 59% a year ago. And multifamily production increased by 15% in the fourth quarter relative to a year ago, compared with 5% last year. At this time, I'm going to step off. The secretary, I believe, has arrived, so I will pick back up momentarily.
Well, that was fast. Okay, so I now have the pleasure of introducing HUD's current secretary, Julian Castro, who's going to provide us with some opening remarks on this topic before we return to Kevin. Could you join me in providing the secretary with a warm welcome?
Good to see you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, it is wonderful to join y'all here this afternoon. Thank you very much, Kathy, for convening us today, and most importantly, thank you for your tremendous leadership here at HUD. I also want to thank our distinguished list of panelists. I know they're going to share their insights today. I appreciate their time and their effort. I also want to thank all of you in the audience. I know we have folks who have studied these issues of gentrification and displacement, changing communities for a long time, and who have your own insights and opinions to offer as well. I want to thank the folks who are watching online, all two of them. As Kevin told us a few minutes ago, the housing market in American cities, as y'all know, is getting stronger and is on the rise. All across the nation, young professionals, growing families, and retired couples are returning to our urban centers in search of greater opportunity and a better life. Now, it's our responsibility to ensure that all Americans have a chance to take part in this resurgence. Here's why we're here today. Throughout our nation's cities, neighborhoods are confronting a significant and challenging dynamic. A distressed, underserved, low to moderate income neighborhood starts to get attention. The affordability crunch in other neighborhoods drives higher income residents to start buying and renting there. And soon, the neighborhood gets investment. Amenities that neighbors who've lived there for a while have been waiting for: a new supermarket, restaurants, some nightlife, some infrastructure improvements. And the neighborhood gets more popular, and soon more new folks are moving in. Eventually, home values in the neighborhood shoot up, and so do property taxes. And sometimes rents rise. Little by little, the folks who used to call the neighborhood home can't afford to live there anymore. They can't afford the rent or to pay property taxes. Some sell because they can make a handsome return now. A tipping point is reached in the neighborhood. Its culture, its economics, its essence has changed completely. And it's no longer a place that the folks who built their lives and raised their families there belong to anymore. We're not here today because we believe that neighborhoods shouldn't grow or change, but because we believe that when they do, it ought to be inclusive and affordable to families of modest means. We're here because we believe in dynamic and diverse neighborhoods. And the importance of this mission isn't just about policies and practices. It really is about the people that are being priced out of places that they've called home for generations. Folks like Helen and Nelson Murray, a husband and wife from Portland, Oregon. The Murrays have spent more than 60 years in the neighborhood of Northeast Portland. Their children graduated from the local school system. They shopped for groceries at the Safeway near the Lloyd Center. And their family attended the Emmanuel Temple Church on North Summer Street. When they moved into their house on Northeast 11th Avenue, the neighborhood was split fairly evenly between black and white families. But its demographics began to change as time passed. And pretty soon, the Murrays were one of the last families of color still left in the neighborhood. After an accident forced Nelson to retire from his job at an iron factory, the family began falling into debt. And as prices around them grew, they found it harder and harder just to get by. At one point, they faced the prospect of leaving the home they loved so dearly. It's something that Helen could barely think about. She said that if she ever had to move, she couldn't bear returning to the street, even for a visit, that it would simply hurt too much. Sadly, their story is typical for many African American households in Portland, folks who have been forced to leave the places that they've always called home. Over the course of a single decade, the black population east of Interstate 205, a section seen as the outskirts of town, increased by 166%. And over that same period of time, it declined by 13% across the rest of the city. Now, I've met Portland Mayor Charlie Hales, and I know that he's voiced his commitment to addressing gentrification for residents there. And the thing is that the changes happening in Portland aren't unique to that city. I don't mean to pick on Portland, if there's anybody from Portland here. As y'all know very well, these are changes that are taking place across the United States in communities from Bernal Heights in San Francisco to East Austin to many neighborhoods right here in Washington, D.C. As a former mayor, I know that the issues facing local leaders are sensitive and complex ones, and that there's no single red button policy that we can push to achieve dynamic and diverse neighborhoods. That's why events like today are so important. I hope you'll use this afternoon to share your strategies and experiences for promoting inclusive growth for all residents of your cities. And I want you to know that HUD is focused on taking this discussion to a national scale. Just last week, I visited San Francisco in the last stop of a 5-city effort for a new initiative that we're calling the Prosperity Playbook. This playbook will provide leaders and stakeholders around the nation with a toolkit to develop regional plans that create shared opportunity for everyone in their communities. Before my trip to the West Coast, I also had the chance to sit down with folks on the ground in Kansas City, Denver, Atlanta, and Minneapolis. At each of those stops, I heard how they're dealing with the challenges posed by gentrification and how they're working to support upward mobility for all residents. These conversations, I know, will produce some great ideas that I look forward to sharing in our final playbook. And I promise that HUD will continue to fight for the resources our partners need to transform them into concrete action. Our proposed budget for fiscal year 2017 requests $2.8 billion for CDBG, which improves infrastructure, rehabilitates housing, and creates jobs for local residents. It also includes $950 million for the Home Investment Partnerships Program, which helps state and local governments build affordable housing and promote homeownership among families of modest means. I'm also proud to report that we recently announced the initial grants for the National Housing Trust Fund. This fund is the first new affordable housing production program in nearly a generation, and the first to concentrate almost exclusively on extremely low-income families, where we find the biggest gap in the availability of affordable housing. We'll start rolling out our opening round of funding this summer, more than $170 million to the states, and that's just the beginning. But HUD also understands that our work to revitalize underserved communities shouldn't reshape their entire identity. We can't lose track of the individuals and the families that live there now. Families that have lived on the same street for generations, who've helped build proud traditions and cultures within their neighborhoods, and who deserve to share in the promise that is created by new investment and new activity. We need to dispense opportunity across the board and not displace those who too oftentimes get lost in the shuffle. And finally, we need to keep in mind that gentrification isn't a simple black and white issue. Throughout the United States, successful young professionals and families of color are also coming to cities in pursuit of their dreams. It might be tempting to paint a picture of the typical gentrifier with a singular, broad brush stroke, but doing so dramatically oversimplifies the challenges that we face. And it further divides our nation at a time when we must come together to tackle the problems which confront us all. And if we need any proof of the power of working together, we can just look at the story of the Murrays, the elderly couple from Northeast Portland that I mentioned. Their situation came to the attention of Liz Getty, a single mom who lives across the street from them. When Liz found out what was happening to her neighbors, she decided to take action. She used an online crowdfunding campaign to raise more than $6,000 for construction materials for badly needed repairs at the Murray's house. And when Helen Murray saw the first of these materials arrive in her driveway, she began to cry. Thanks to Liz and a team of volunteers, they built the Murrays a new roof so they could pass a city inspection and avoid foreclosure on their home. But the real challenge isn't just making sure that Helen and Nelson get to keep their house. It's about pursuing smart policies so that the Murray's children and grandchildren and families like theirs in changing neighborhoods throughout our nation can continue to call the place of their roots home. So thank you for being here, for lending us your expertise, exchanging ideas, and ultimately, through your work, doing your part to ensure the American dream is within reach for everyone living in our cities. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And now we're going to return to Kevin Kane, who's going to fill in a little more of the background on what's been happening in housing markets across the nation. Kevin.
All right, let's take a look at regional conditions around the country. These are assessments that are provided by our field economists. Relative to last quarter, improvements in an area are shaded in blue and declines are shaded in brown. So as you look at that, nothing wrong with your eyes, there is nothing in brown. Sales market conditions remained relatively balanced in the regions of the country with tight conditions in the Rocky Mountains and in the Northwest. Conditions improved in the Southeast, where some markets that were previously slightly tight have become balanced. On the rental side, nearly all regions have markets that are experiencing tight or slightly tight conditions. Some of the tightness has eased in some markets in the Southwest, in the Rocky Mountains, and in the Northwest relative to last quarter, though we do still have very tight markets in the Northwest. And then taking a look at the Mid-Atlantic, some markets that were slightly soft are now considered to be balanced. This next figure shows the year-over-year change in home price indices on a monthly basis. And this is looking at all three home price indices since 2005. In December of 2015, the S&P index, shown in blue, was up nearly 5% from a year ago, and the FHFA index in red and the CoreLogic index in black were both up by 6% relative to a year ago. And these were the same rates that we saw in September. The rates of increase have been relatively steady since the end of last year, and you can see that with the flattening of the curve off on the right. This next map shows the change in the monthly CoreLogic House Price Index on a state level from 1 year ago. Nationally, the increase was 6%. This was the same increase as last quarter, and prices were up or unchanged in all states, including the District of Columbia, except for 3 states, and those are shown in brown, and that's Mississippi, Louisiana, and Maryland, where prices were down between 1% and 2%. Prices in the 2 lighter shades of blue increased by less than or equal to the national average. One was unchanged, that was New Mexico. And prices in the 10 dark blue states were up by more than the national average, led for the 3rd consecutive quarter by a 10% increase in Colorado. Washington also moved into a share at the top spot with a 10% increase. According to the Census Bureau, the median price of a new home in the 4th quarter was $293,200. This was down 3% from a year ago. And according to the National Association of Realtors, the median price of an existing home was $220,700. This was up 6% from a year ago. Let's take a closer look at the Northwest. Prices were up in all 26 metropolitan areas, all in blue, and they declined in one area, which was Longview, shown in brown, and that was down by 1%. The 15 areas in the darkest shade of blue increased by more than the national average, led by Bend, Oregon at 13%. Seattle and Portland were both up by 10% from last year. This next map shows the percent of home loans that are 90 or more days delinquent in foreclosure or in REO as of December of 2015. REO stands for real estate owned, which means that the lender now owns the property. The national average was 3.3% of all loans in those categories. This was down from 4.1% a year ago. We continue to see a split across the country with regions in blue below the national average and those in brown above it. And the Midwest switched sides this time around. Now in blue, last quarter the Midwest was in brown. The rate is still high in New York, New Jersey at 6.8%, and for the 10th consecutive quarter, the rate declined in every region of the country. And for the 8th consecutive quarter, the most dramatic decline occurred in the Southeast, which was down by 1.4 percentage points to 4%, led by a 2.8 percentage point decline in Florida to 5.3%. And this was the largest decline in the country. The rate was down by 1.2 percentage points in the New York, New Jersey region from a year ago as well. Based on CoreLogic data, the new and existing home sales were up by 5% during 2015 compared with a year ago. Sales were up in every region except for a 2% decline in the Southwest. 7 areas grew by more than the national increase, and those are shown in the darker two shades of blue, led for the second consecutive quarter by a 16% increase in the Northwest, where sales were up in Oregon by 20%, up in Washington by 16%, and Idaho also had a 13% increase in home sales. Let's take a closer look at that Southwest region, where again sales were down by 2%. Sales declined in 19 of the 48 metropolitan areas, and those are shown in brown. They were unchanged in 5 areas, and they were up in 24 areas. The 2 areas in the darker shades of blue increased by more than the national average. Metropolitan areas of note in Houston, sales were down by 8%. They declined by 7% in Oklahoma City. Sales were up a little bit in Dallas by 1%, increased by 3% in New Orleans, and Fayetteville led the increase in the region, up by 11%. Let's take a look at home building. Single-family home building is measured by building permits issued, increased by 6% to 140,900 homes during the fourth quarter relative to a year ago. This was up from a 5% increase last quarter. Permits were up in 5 regions, led by the Northwest and the Pacific, with gains of 21% and 16%. Activity declined in 4 regions, led by a 9% decline in New England. On the multifamily side, the number of permits was up by 15% to 119,500 units during the fourth quarter. This compares with a 5% increase last quarter. 7 of the 10 regions had gains. The largest gains occurred in New York, New Jersey, which was up by a whopping 120%. This is after a 20% decline last quarter, so some of that increase is a little bit of a correction for what happened last quarter. The number of units permitted was up by 55% in New England and 49% in the Great Plains. Multifamily permits declined in 3 regions, led by an 18% decline in the Rocky Mountains. This next map takes a look at the vacancy rates across the country. After 2 consecutive quarters of no change, the national vacancy rate increased very slightly, but 0.1% in the fourth quarter relative to a year ago. According to Reese data, the national vacancy rate was 4.4% during the fourth quarter. Rates were down slightly in the 2 brown regions, and they were up or unchanged in the 8 blue regions. Gains were highest for the second consecutive quarter in New England, which was up by 1 percentage point, and the Northwest, which was up by 0.8 percentage points. Vacancy rates ranged from a low of 3.2% in the New York and New Jersey region to 5.6% in the Southwest. And according to Reese data, which covers 275 markets around the country, vacancy rates were down in 136 market areas, and last quarter they were down in 175 market areas. The rates this quarter were up in 126 areas, and again, last quarter they were up in 89 market areas, and then they remained unchanged in 13 areas. So there's definitely some changes that are going on in the rental market that we can see. There were only 4 markets with a decline of 2 percentage points or more, and that's relative to 10 last quarter. According to the Census Bureau, for the entire U.S., the rental vacancy rate was 7% in the fourth quarter, and that's unchanged from a year ago. Let's take a closer look at the New York, New Jersey region. The regional vacancy rate was 3.2%, down from 3.4% last quarter. This map shows the vacancy rates of 14 metropolitan areas relative to the national rate. All areas except for 1, Cape May, are below the national rate. Central New Jersey and Utica, in the 2 darkest shades of brown, have rates that are more than 2 percentage points below the national rate. And the rate in New York City was 3.1%. Let's take a look now at rents around the country. Rents were up by 4.6% nationally, according to Reis, from the fourth quarter of last year. This compares with an increase of 4.2% last quarter. Rents grew in all regions of the country, the whole country shown in blue. The 4 regions in darker blue increased faster than the national average, led for the second consecutive quarter by the Northwest, where rents were up by 7.7%. The average market rent in the fourth quarter for the areas covered by Reis was $1,229, and rents increased in 264 out of the 275 areas covered by Reis. Let's take a closer look at the Rocky Mountain region, where the regional rent growth was 6.2%. Rents in the fourth quarter were up in all 11 metropolitan areas, and those shown in blue. The 5 in the darkest shades of blue were up by more than the national average, led by Boulder with a gain of 6.9%. And other notable metros from the area, Denver up by 6.8%, and Salt Lake City up by 4.1%. And in honor of our panel discussion this afternoon, we've put together a couple maps on gentrification. Hopefully folks can see those. I know it's kind of small, but we've included a couple of these bonus maps of Washington, D.C. In the first map, we look at the change in median household income looking from 2000 to 2014. Brown areas declined, and areas in blue increased, and the darker the shade of blue, the higher the level of increase. With the very darkest shades of blue, those census tracts increased by more than 200% over this period. Now keep in mind that the national change during that same period was 28%, right? So a dramatic difference compared with the changes in the nation. And in this next map, we look at the percentage change in median home values, again, those same areas in DC. Once again, those dark blue areas increased by more than 200%. And to put it in perspective for the nation, the national increase was 47% increase. So there's significant changes that are occurring in these dark blue areas. The question posed is, what happens to those residents in those areas when these changes occur? That's what our panel is going to discuss this afternoon. So let me summarize. Year-over-year job growth from the fourth quarter was 2%. Sales markets remained relatively balanced throughout the country, with some areas of tightness. Price gains remained relatively stable compared with last quarter, and total sales increased by 5%. Rental market conditions remain tight or slightly tight in many markets around the country. Rents are rising at an accelerated pace, and vacancy rates edged up slightly nationally. For additional information, you can go to the U.S. Housing Market Conditions website on huduser.gov. You can talk with your local regional or field economists, or you can feel free to contact me. Thank you very much, and at this time I will pass things back over to Dr. O'Regan, who's going to lead our panel this afternoon.
Great. Perfect. I love those maps. It is always such a treat to see how Kevin is going to work the panel conversation into some maps and data right at the end. And I can see that with our panelists, we've kind of covered the 3 hottest housing markets in the country. So perfect for the panel. So as we get started, I'm going to just give some framing remarks and provide a little bit of data from research just to frame the conversation. The first thing that I want to start with is just something you all know. Conversations about gentrification are not new. Gentrification actually has been a topic of discussion since the phrase was first coined by Ruth Glass, a British sociologist, in 1964. So we've got 50 years plus of interesting and frequently heated conversation, both in the public discourse and in the research debate. On the public side, I think you've already heard from the secretary and read in the papers why it is. This would be a potentially emotional conversation. We're talking about people's homes and communities, changes that may force long-term residents to leave, and for those who remain, turn the neighborhood into something that's unrecognizable as home, right? So that's the potential here. On the research side, much research debate is not contentious. This one gets heated too. And we have debates about the prevalence, about the causes, and the consequences. We even debate the definition. So I'm going to start with that. On the definition side, if you turn to a dictionary definition, you'll see the focus on changes in gains in income in a community. And then usually two more things. There is the presumption that along with that change comes displacement of original residents, usually those who are most vulnerable and lower income. And in addition, maybe wholesale change in the community. And I'm going to use a different term during my opening remarks. I'm going to use neighborhood change because that focuses on the income change in a community and does not presume two of the phenomena that may be the reason that this is such an emotional conversation or where there's contentious debate, the displacement and wholesale change. So I'm going to focus on those as a potential outcome from these engines of growth, but not necessarily an outcome because of our HUDs and our collective interest in possibly finding ways to harness the potential upside when areas begin to experience the resurgence that the Secretary was talking about without necessarily the high cost of displacement and large wholesale change in a community, particularly where it ends up decreasing diversity. And so I'm going to show a few slides to kind of bolster that, but also just leave a little facts on the table on what we're talking about. So this is work. Before I came here, I was doing work on gentrification, it was pointed out earlier, with Ingrid Gould-Ellen at the Furman Center, and they've done some updated work that's going to be released soon on the first question. So the first question of how prevalent is it? Are we seeing and experiencing an uptick in neighborhood change or gentrification? Short answer, yes. No debate anymore on this. It was debated in the 90s, not debated now. This graph looks at the share of low-income census tracts in cities, and we are seeing that this is largest in city tracts, that experience a large gain in relative income, so income relative to their surrounding community. This is not just about growth in income overall, over the next decade. So if you look at the 1990s, we saw a big uptick in city tracts, not quite a doubling, but close on the likelihood that a low-income neighborhood was going to end the decade having experienced a large gain in resident income, and that has stayed. So we're seeing that through the 2000s. I'll remind you that the 1990s is when we had a very large decrease in crime. It was particularly in cities and in the high-poverty neighborhoods in cities. So that's the first question. On whether or not we always experience wholesale racial or socioeconomic change in neighborhoods, we get a slightly different pattern across time. So this is similar type of analysis, but here looking at the extent to which those low-income city tracts experienced relatively large increases in the share of the population that were college educated. So if you look at the 1990s, even though there was a big uptick on gains in income, it wasn't being driven in the same way through in-movement of high-skilled labor. Looks really different in the most current 14 years with the resurgence in cities and the interest in higher-skilled workers living downtown, millennials, et cetera. It's even more dramatic when you look at race. So this looks at the percent gain in share of the population that was white in these low-income city tracts during this time period. In the 1990s, even though we had a large uptick in income gains, we mainly had racial stability in those tracts. In fact, in the 90s, we were losing white populations, so this was a way of retaining a sort of white population. Very, very different in this current time period, looking a lot more like kind of the classic definition of gentrification, hence lots of concern around the country and communities on what this resurgence means. So my last slide is taking a look at one other piece of this. The Secretary talked about it, part of our context, which was the increase in rents in these neighborhoods. So in the 1990s, even though city tracts were gaining, they didn't disproportionately have large rent increases during this time period relative to the surrounding metros. Very different in this current time period. So in this current, and this is relative rent gain. This isn't the affordability crisis writ large. This is increases in rents relative to the surrounding metro area. So in San Francisco, as all your rents are going up, it's even worse in these low-income tracts. And that last point is worth noting that if you take these graphs and you break them out around the country, you get different stories A lot of big cities are experiencing even more of these changes. Not all of them, but a number of them. San Francisco and New York and DC would be high on the list. So the last of the three questions is about displacement. And on that one, there is still debate, and the research discourse is very different than the public discourse. Empirical work looking at these neighborhoods experiencing large change do not see greater turnover in these neighborhoods relative to other low-income neighborhoods. The work I did in the 1990s that unbundled this said you are seeing a big increase in incomes. It's being driven by entry much more so than exit. And you saw increased construction in those neighborhoods. So in fact, it doesn't have to be true that with incomes going up, you're necessarily displacing. Now there's still debate in this, and it's an average effect. These are average graphs. I would not say that that would hold in San Francisco or New York now, given what's happening, but it does suggest the potential that if you had various policy levers, we might be able to do something about two of the big outcomes that we'd like to affect here. And so that's the frame that we want to use for today's conversation, right? So if we think about HUD's mission, and the secretary said it, right? So our mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars here at HUD every year on place-based strategies. Where we succeed, or where the market is driving this regardless of our efforts, how do we capture those benefits so that we actually, the original residents may gain some of those benefits and that we actually have sustainable integration in communities? It's hugely ambitious to hope that the panel will get to that today and sort of answer that, but we want to be having a conversation, and the secretary said this as a national conversation now, as so many parts of the country are grappling with this so we can help more communities. So I'm going to hang on to that. So I'm going to now turn over to the panel. I'm going to welcome the panelists up to the stage, and I'll introduce them and sort of set the ground rules for how we're going to go through the conversation today. So we have three great panelists with us, researchers and practitioners from, as I noted, three of the hottest housing markets in the country. Derek Hyrer, who's sitting down right now, is joining us from most locally in DC, an associate professor at American University, does a lot of work on gentrification. We're overlapping on a lot of panels recently. And he's actually worked at HUD, and this is the bit of nepotism, specifically in PD&R in the past, so he knows us and our programs well. With them, we're going to be followed by Colvin Granum, who's the president and CEO of Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation, which most of you know of as the nation's first community development corporation in the next hot market on dealing with this, and he's been on the ground and dealing with this, what this is like for residents. And then I'm going to turn it over to Gil Kelly, who actually is here from San Francisco. He's the director of citywide planning, and he is going to speak from the planning perspective on the ground of a city that's grappling with a sort of massive push in this area. The way we're going to run through the panel is a moderated panel. So I'm going to hand it over now. We're going to go 5 minutes each in row, and then we're going to open it up. We'll have some Q&A back here for the panelists, and then open up to the audience. So you should be teeing up questions you have, both here in the room and online for when we get to the Q&A part of the presentation. Thanks. And with that, turn it over to you, Derek.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation to be here this afternoon and for the focus on what I think is an extremely important topic for the nation right now. I particularly want to thank Secretary Castro for his insightful remarks. I thought he did a great job of describing the processes of gentrification and some of the outcomes that can happen. I also want to thank the PD&R Assistant Secretary, Secretary O'Regan, for her framing comments. Again, I think she really teed this up nicely. And her rigorous gentrification research has greatly influenced my own thoughts about this topic. So while residential displacement is a critical gentrification topic, in my time, I want to cover some of the consequences of gentrification, both positive and negative, for low-income residents who are able to remain in place while redevelopment occurs. So that'll sort of be my comments. Now, I just want to contextualize some of these comments. A I've been researching Washington, D.C. for the last 10 years, and we just saw Kevin's slide. I mean, it's like the whole city is gentrifying, right? Now, I've spent the last 6 years looking at the Shaw U Street area, which is the Harlem of D.C., and its redevelopment process. I also have just finished an edited volume called Capital Dilemma, Growth and Inequality in Washington, D.C., and much of this volume focuses on the contemporary gentrification that's taking place. So if we're talking about gentrification, surely Washington, D.C. is one of the places where you want to study this phenomenon. Now, there's controversy about the definition of gentrification. And so when Ruth Glass in the 60s came up with this concept, she was really interested in upper income residents moving into a low income area. It didn't necessarily mean that displacement would occur. But I would also include in the definition, it's not just when upper income residents come in, sometimes the investment. So commercial and residential investment coming into a low income area I think is really critical, because that can lead to increases in property values. But in some instances, residential displacement does not occur because we do have some affordable housing policies that help keep residents in place as property values rise. Now, also there is, as Assistant Secretary Regan talked about, we have a lot of studies that have shown that residential displacement among low-income people is no higher in gentrified areas than areas that are low-income that are more stable. So let's really unpack what happens to low-income people who are able to remain in place when upper-income residents come into their community. So we have all these theories, right, about mixed-income neighborhoods and mixed-race neighborhoods. This is the whole Hope 6, right, where areas where we have high concentrations of poverty, we want to do redevelopment to encourage the middle class to come back. This is William Julius Wilson and his theories. Now, having the middle class come back is supposed to lead to more jobs, to also have greater access for jobs for low-income people. There also are role models coming into low-income communities, and also maybe we'd have greater political strength. Now, the problem is that all these mechanisms of benefit for low-income people sort of assume we'll have meaningful interaction among the newcomers, who tend to be upper income, and the low-income residents. Now, what the research is showing in these areas, it's my research, Mark Joseph, another woman, Laura Tack, that in these redeveloping communities, in gentrified areas, we have micro-level segregation going on. The communities may look very diverse, but when you get into the social fabric of the communities, they are segregated. The recreation centers, the churches, the restaurants, the living places. So we really need to think about how are we going to grease the wheels of micro-level integration in the gentrified neighborhoods. And I would make the statement that HUD policy and city policy has not done a good job of that. We've done a great job of creating mixed-income housing, but we haven't thought much about, and then what? How are we going to get populations that have been separated for a long time to get together within these communities? So when you have this separation, you tend to get political displacement. So the newcomers take over, the civic associations, and they ask for amenities like bike lanes and dog parks. And these may not be the amenities that low-income community residents are asking for. So again, I think the challenge here is how are we going to tweak policies to grease the wheels of micro-level integration so that gentrified neighborhoods can maximize the benefits for long-term low-income residents in once impoverished places. And I hope that the conversation today that we have can help us understand a little bit better how to achieve the goal of equitable gentrification. I think if we do that, then these redeveloped communities will be more equitable, fair, and just. Thank you.
Well, that's terrific, and I'm sure that many of us are writing down that phrase now, equitable gentrification. Very good. Great. Golden.
I'm trying to turn mine off here. That's not. There we go. Got it. Now you just...
Okay. So I'm happy to be here. I'm delighted to be with you all. I have the distinct pleasure of working in the community where I was born. I actually work less than a half mile from the hospital where I was born, and I grew up in the western section of what was called Bedford-Stuyvesant in the 1960s and 1970s, but it's now called Clinton Hill, which is a historic name. and the area has officially been designated as a historic district. Clinton Hill is now at least 60% white, and the median income exceeds the citywide average. So there's been very much dramatic change in that Clinton Hill section. When I was growing up, it was probably more than 85% Black and Hispanic, with high levels of poverty and a fair degree of integration between moderate income and working class and low income residents. So let me tell you a little bit about Bed-Stuy. There's approximately 140,000 people in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which I always say makes it a medium-sized U.S. city. It's a lot of people. I wanted to go through some of what I'm going to call the cross-cutting, I just made this up, I don't know if it makes any sense, cross-cutting environmental factors today in Bedford-Stuyvesant that I think are related to, but not necessarily caused by gentrification. The first thing would be public safety. There's been a major reduction in serious crime, but it's still above the citywide average. But I think that this reduction is significant because it's given everyone greater confidence in the community, whether it's potential home buyers, existing home buyers, or folks who own commercial buildings, or potential investors. The reduction in crime has made way for growth. The second thing I want to talk about is housing, what we are seeing. Before the Great Recession, we started to see a surge in the production of housing, and that dropped off, especially the home ownership component during the Great Recession. But since then, we've witnessed a large increase in the number of newly constructed market rate apartments, significant increase in the volumes of real estate values with corresponding increase in the prices of homes and the rents for unregulated apartments, high amounts of low and moderate income resident displacement from unregulated units, and increased levels of displacement from rent stabilization. Wow, 2 minutes. So I just want to quickly say, the thing about Bedford-Stuyvesant is it's a part of what's called Brownstone, Brooklyn. And so it's for the most part a really low density community, which during the 70s, many of the owners of those buildings rented out the upper floor. So let's just say it's 1 to 4 family, but very few properties were used as one family, so you typically had maybe 2 or 3 rental units. I wanted to talk quickly about the subpopulations and how they're affected, and I'll go through that really quickly and say, you know, it's not a monolithic community. There are a lot of, and historically has been, lots of what you would call subcomponents in the community. So homeowners, obviously, there's increased market values and rents, and people are taking advantage of that. People are also having increased opportunities for things like Airbnb. I think in Bed-Stuy, we're like among the top 5 hosts for Airbnb. On the other hand, there's increased maintenance expense and that kind of thing. But another thing that you would probably not expect is there's harassment from speculators of existing homeowners. And there's an increase in something called deed theft. I don't know if you have it here in DC, but people are literally forging new deeds and stealing them away from properties away from unsuspecting owners. And you could break the rental group down into various components. So we have subsidized housing, a significant percentage, 28% is subsidized, dedicated to low income. To Derek's point, those folks typically are not going anywhere, so they're low income and sort of protected by the structure of the financing of the housing. But unregulated, we have a significant amount of unregulated housing. The last thing I want to say is we should talk about moderate income residents, because I think in many ways they have the least protection, even though low income people have the least amount of availability.
Great, thank you. Okay, Bill.
Great. Maybe I have to turn this off.
Yeah,
Let me turn mine off.
As you just push
I
this.
think you can have more than one, but
Yeah, there you go. Got it.
There we go. Does that come off my 5 minutes?
No.
Well, like Colvin, I actually am practicing in the city. I was born in San Francisco, although I grew up in Portland, where I was also planning director for most of the decade of the 2000s, and I appreciate everything the Secretary said in his opening remarks. I know well the dynamics in the neighborhood he was describing there, but I'll talk mostly about San Francisco, at least in my opening remarks. I appreciate the Assistant Secretary sort of teasing apart the definition of gentrification. I have to say that in San Francisco, at least since the emerging from the recession, the experience of San Franciscans is that gentrification equals displacement. And I think that goes to two principal factors. One, it has to do with the geography, that is San Francisco being a small center of a larger region. But also the superheated economy in the Bay Area. So it's really left us with two principal questions in terms of shaping a more equitable future, assuming that is a priority goal, which it is politically and in terms of the community ethos in San Francisco. And those questions really are, how do we stem further displacement as growth and growth in incomes comes to the city? And secondly, how do communities of mixed income, which are gentrifying rapidly, actually coexist? So getting at the sort of micro segregation or micro integration issue that Derek spoke about. Let me just give a little bit of context. San Francisco and the Bay Area in general has become the epicenter of a really worldwide economic restructuring around the digital revolution. And I say that only because this is not a cycle or a bubble. It will certainly have economic cycles to it, but San Francisco is becoming, I think, a world player in terms of the digital revolution, the digital economy, and that's just driving a huge amount of wealth accumulation and capital and all that comes with that, as those people and as that capital looks for places to invest. That coincides with a larger urban migration trend, which the Assistant Secretary alluded to, and I would say, put it even larger terms, I think it's the reversal of the trend that we saw in American cities about half a century ago, which is that the core of cities, the core of regions now are becoming the desired neighborhood, reversing decades of white flight and bringing high-income people to the core. And that certainly goes to both retirees and empty nesters, as well as to the Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, who in San Francisco's case, a disproportionate share of those are actually technology workers with incomes that are at least 50% more than the area median income and often greater for those moving to San Francisco. So those two phenomenon, I think, together are a very powerful force in San Francisco. A little bit of context, San Francisco is only 49 square miles, so within the larger Bay Area region, we have only about 15% of the housing units and population. And I think what's more telling is that there is very much a churn of that population, so that every year we're gaining, since the recession, we've gained about between 60 and 70,000 people in population, but we have lost nearly the same amount. So we're getting more information on exactly who those people are and where they're going, but it's safe to say that generally the incoming population has higher incomes, and the population that's leaving are largely middle and moderate income, not necessarily the very lowest income, but the low, moderate, and middle income strata and families are leaving the city, which gives us a real challenge. The prices are escalating very high. We now have the highest housing prices in the country. I think the average home price is over $1 million. The average rent of a studio or one bedroom is $3,600 a month. And for a two-bedroom, which is sort of the minimum size for a family really, is about $4,500 a month and going up. So just to give you a little perspective there, many San Franciscans actually now ask themselves out loud and their friends and neighbors, are we losing our soul? And some put that in the past tense, have we lost our soul? And can we still be a diverse city? And so I think I just wanted to put that in context. In terms of a response, the city's economist has estimated that we'd need to produce about 10,000 new market rate units per year to even flatten the prices, given the demand. And we're actually only now building about 3,500 units per year, and that's the highest we've been producing since the early post-war period. So simply adding the supply will not be a cure. I'm run out of time, so I won't go into the aggressive measures we're taking on producing affordable housing, including $1 billion set aside by the local government over a decade to help fund affordable housing, and a number of other tools there. I would just end by saying that we cannot build our way out of this or subsidize our way out of this crisis alone. So we have now come to the conclusion this is really a region-wide issue, and the real solutions to closing the gap have to be seen as regional cooperation with new tools and something akin to the Federal Housing Trust Fund at the regional and local level. Thank you.
That's terrific, and we have been brutal in time constraints. So I invite you as I pose questions for you to be able to thread in the things that you had wanted to speak of, and there was an overlap here on thinking about who we really need to worry about in terms of the displacement question. So I'm actually going to start on the strategies part, because I want to make sure that you get to put forward what you think some of the most compelling strategies would be. And for some, some strategies you might be suggesting are slightly a look in the rear view for your community, but you're at the front of a lot of what's going on in the country, and we can just kind of rapid fire get some strategies out there to talk about, and then go into some of the more nuanced questions of other players we might want to be thinking about, and other ways in which we want to think about narrative and people heard. So on strategies that you didn't get to, that nobody got to talk about strategies, basically. Strategies.
All right,
Go right ahead.
Some strategies.
Yep.
So the first thing is that in gentrified areas, we have to preserve the current stock of affordable housing so people can stay. That's step one. So how can we do that? There are a couple policies. The low-income housing tax credit, right? That is one of our production policies. We should be preferencing them. The states are the ones who set the preferences in gentrified areas. We also have the new market tax credit, another policy. We should be preferencing them again in areas that are revitalizing. We also need to think about, we have knocked down most of our distressed public housing, but there is a good amount of viable public housing in some of these gentrified areas. And making sure that housing authorities utilize their operating and capital funds in ways to make sure that these housing projects are sustained in the areas that are coming back, I think is an important strategy. So I'll leave with that, and I have other ones, but why don't we get some other ideas out?
I sort of think about, excuse me, Colton, did you want to go for it? Okay. I sort of divide strategies into two camps. One are more process strategies, and others are maybe more investment strategies. On the process side, I would say that what we've come to recently in San Francisco is to, particularly from the planning department and the city's department's points of view, is to engage communities directly in developing strategies from the ground up. And we come up with solutions that we might not have led with from the city government. Everything from tenant eviction counseling to SRO stabilization and others, which in some of these conversations is taking more of a front seat than actually housing production, just given the time lag. And things like site acquisition so that the public actually, even if there's not the money right away, long-term own sites on which housing can be developed.
Before I talk about these strategies, you prompted me to think about something when you talked about bike lanes and that amenity. We're actually at Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration promoting the use of something called City Bike. Right, City Bike is, I think you have it in DC.
Oh, yeah.
Something comparable, sort of shared, use of bikes, which in New York has been seen, and I don't know about DC, as a symbol of gentrification.
Same in DC.
So we were literally hired to promote the use of City Bike by low and minority riders. Now, why is that important to us? When you look at it, a lot of the low income residents live the least close to transit facilities. And so what we've been able to argue is that this is actually a low-cost way for many existing residents to get to a transit hub. And rather than shun it, they ought to utilize it. And so we've got incentives, we've got workplace incentives, we've got a range of tools that we're working to use to generate increased usage of City Bike, which you could argue is a sort of transportation equity device. But the initial reaction to it was, it's not for us and we're not going to use it. So I think there are these kinds of amenities or improvements that we might be able to frame in a way that benefits the existing low-income residents. One of the things that we see in our communities is that some of the underutilized land is owned by churches and some other institutions, maybe hospitals, et cetera. And so there's a greater emphasis, we're working with a couple of churches now, on having them develop their land for affordable housing. They're going to need some incentives because they're also being courted by market rate developers to put their land to use as market rate housing. But many of them are inclined, right, to put the land to use for the existing population. The other thing that we would love to see, but there's no real existing policy promoting this, is moderate income home ownership in these areas, right? Right now, what we're seeing is a large production of rental housing, either market rate or low income, and the home ownership is all, high end. I have to say, having grown up in the community, moderate income home ownership is what built many of the families, right? It was the equalizer, maybe not an equalizer, but it was certainly a vehicle for upward mobility. So you have immigrants coming to this country who could purchase a home, people moving from the South who could purchase a home. This is no longer a viable approach or opportunity, and I think it has tremendous long-term consequences in the context of upward mobility. So those are two things I would focus on at the moment.
That's terrific. And so I know one of the things that you had started to lay out was to think about those current residents in different categories, subpopulations. And that's really, and you both were talking about moderate income and that we should focus there. And as we came forward on strategies, it may be the affordable housing strategies, we at least know what that bucket is. And the lowest income renters who are assisted are protected. And that's not where we see the displacement. It may be that next group. We actually did see displacement of homeowners in the 1990s, which, some are, cashing out, so you might feel differently about it, but it changes looking forward for how our neighborhood will be stabilized and who's going to be there. So if we can think about the strategies on the moderate income, and I had not heard about the predatory behavior on existing homeowners in terms of the deeds until this last year. And so I'm kind of curious about this process strategy, Gil, of getting on the ground and having those in the community tell you about what they're experiencing as a way of teeing up the priorities of strategies, and whether there are some others that we could tee up, either the process of doing that, which is not all planners' starting place as you come up with the orientation, and what we learn by doing that.
Yeah, I think many planners are used to approaching all problems as a land use problem or a zoning problem.
All economists think it's we all have our...
And this is clearly not even doing a district-wide multi-purpose plan. It's really doing a more action-oriented strategy that can start bearing fruit right away and address immediate problems. Those other larger plans can sit in the background and be developed over time. I guess I would say that on the housing side, there's been a fair amount of focus in San Francisco anyway on housing production for various levels of incomes. The moderate and middle income, and the middle income particularly, has been almost absent. And a recent program, for example, or at least a proposal, was to allow density bonuses for a certain amount of low and moderate income, and then a slightly higher percentage of moderate income, just to get at that middle income strata. That's run into real controversy in San Francisco's neighborhoods. The trading height for retaining middle income families has not been a desirable trade-off in some neighborhoods. So that's one recent experiment. The other thing I would point to is that through these community conversations, it becomes more clear that a number of things outside of the pure housing arena that we do are equally important. So preserving industrial jobs and manufacturing jobs, for example, in the city has been a policy for about 8 years. San Francisco kind of came to that late. Portland, for example, got to that very early, so it's had 3 decades of preserving manufacturing jobs. San Francisco still has a fair amount that it is preserving. And the access to transit, which was mentioned, I think is another key piece of the equity equation, as well as working with the schools and various other kinds of neighborhood facilities that serve families. So you have a more integrated strategy than is often the case if you're simply coming at it as a housing problem, as opposed to a neighborhood stabilization strategy. So I would encourage thinking slightly bigger as but also more strategically.
Can I
Yes.
jump in on this one? So in terms of some processes that maybe go beyond housing but are related to housing in terms of trying to bring people together, right? We talked about this micro level segregation that seems to occur. And I think having moderate income housing, so having low income, middle income, and upper income people all in the community help to facilitate that, because usually the middle income people are kind of the buffers, right? They can relate to the upper income people, they can also relate to the lower income people, better than just having low income and high income in one community. But then how are we going to get people to interact together? And I think that one of the things is we need community building activities. The Community Development Block Grant, which the Secretary mentioned, which has consistently been cut, right? But that is a fund that city mayors can decide how to use, and there's multiple purposes, but that can be used for community development corporations to do community building activities. Now, each city, each community is going to be different. I can't tell you whether the bike lanes are going to bring people together in some places, whether it's going to be community gardens, whether it's going to be a music festival, but we need to be thinking beyond housing to think about community building activities that are going to help people see there's more commonality than difference among them, and that they are mutual interests, and that people could and should work together in their communities. But if we just think about the housing and the zoning, and we don't think about how to bring people together once we have a range of housing in a particular community, then we are going to fail, because we're going to just be segregated at a micro level. So I do think things like the Community Development Block Grant, preserving it, is important. And then also it's important to preserve the interests of low-income people, and also think about the small mom and pops in these communities. It's not just displacement among residents, it's also businesses that get displaced. We have things like the 504 loan and the 7A from the Small Business Administration, not HUD programs, but actually get guaranteed loans to small mom and pops, maybe in these gentrified neighborhoods, so that they can own the real estate, so that maybe they can change their business model slightly, so they can reap the benefits from the new aggregate income that's in their communities. But we need to think about the resident side, but also the commercial side, to see that there are policies that could help low and moderate income people who own businesses in these communities benefit.
Well, yeah, I agree that the commercial sector we've lost a lot of smaller commercial tenants as a result of, I'm going to call it gentrification. Although it's clear that change on the commercial corridors lags behind the residential growth. At Restoration, we're doing a few things, and we've been doing these things, well, one thing in particular we've been doing for the last 50 years as a central pillar of our organization is arts and culture. And this is everything from, we have a theater where we put on live dramatic works, we have music festival, arts festivals, and what we've been seeing is more diversity in the crowds that come and participate in the theater, in the art gallery, at the festivals. And that helps to build that level of community engagement and connective tissue. So I actually think that's important for that reason, but it's also important because the programming that we do tends to reflect both the diversity of the community, but in our case, it would be the arts and culture of people of African diaspora, which tends to maintain that welcomeness, if you will, that often leaves when we have all the trendy new cafes and people feel actually awkward, even if they can afford to go into them. If these restaurants and other cafes, people feel often awkward going in because there's very little diversity in those establishments as well. When I think about this, I actually think about what happens in more well-resourced communities. And so I think schools are an anchor, and that's where people of all, if there's a good school system, people will be there. What's happened in our community is, despite the increase in income diversity and racial and ethnic diversity, the schools are still lagging behind, which means that the newcomers who have other options don't participate in the local school system. So it's not a vehicle for connecting the community. It's likewise true of the recreational, because we don't have the same quality recreational facilities. There's not that much emphasis on recreation. That's not also a place for people to connect. And so it's the whole community building model that needs to happen. It's not just housing, I agree. It's the sort of intentional facilities that can intentionally bring people together that I think is needed as an immediate next step.
That's terrific. And I know that we're going to be teeing up for questions in about 5 minutes or so. So one thing that I want to get out before we move to questions is, I'm going to go back to a point that you said that, Jill, that just went by and nobody picked it up. So you talked about the need in San Francisco for 10,000 more market rate units each year.
Correct.
As a pure supply side issue, distinct from whether or not we need moderate income housing. And Colvin, you talked about reframing the initial living in New York when the bikes came up. This was like, it was a lightning rod of see, it's really about other people's amenities, it's not what we want, they're not putting them in our neighborhoods. And to recast this and get a different point of view on something that starts as seeming like a problem, and in many areas, neighborhoods are saying, we're going to stop gentrification by not letting production happen. That'll stop it from coming to us. And like reframe, how do we change the narrative or get a perspective that will let some of the levers that may be helpful in so that we can make some progress on this?
Well, my sense of this, and I've been doing
Big
work
question.
for 20 years, is that low-income people never see themselves in future development. Like, their face is not there, right? We don't do a good job of projecting them into the future, whether it's a stadium or housing. And then there's just this level of distrust, which to some extent is earned, because in many instances we've let people down. Like, we have not focused our planning predominantly around low and moderate income residents. I think we have a lot of relationship building to do to regain the trust, because right now instinctually people, so I would say that this the planning process is important if it's carried through. I mean, right. The reality is that this happens frequently, but oftentimes the recommendations of local residents are not, are a last priority, or they're tag along. So I think we just have, part of this is reframing not just the narrative, but our actual commitment and having it prove out.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Colvin said, particularly about the trust issue and the rebuilding and maintaining trust. I would add to that on this reframing notion. I think we're at a place in many cities, and San Francisco is so unusual because I think the whole city is a bullseye for gentrification and displacement, not just one or two neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And of course, this has deep cultural implications too about whether these are largely Hispanic neighborhoods traditionally or African American neighborhoods, so forth and so on. I actually think there's a need for a deeper kind of healing conversation about the fact that these now are very different neighborhoods just within the last 5 years. They're very mixed populations. There's a lot of tension, a lot of pressure, a lot of segregation really amongst those populations. And that isn't to say just make people feel better about change and don't do anything about the displacement, but along with actively engaging people in the toolkit for possibly stemming displacement, how do you have kind of a deeper kind of healing conversation that maybe has the potential to have longer endurance than just planners coming in, helping with a process, and then jetting out?
The unfortunate thing is that there are a couple of fortunate things at least. But one is that practitioners like me are oftentimes not on the same side as the predominant community sense of what they want to see happen because they just don't trust the process, period. So, for example, I'll give you a concrete example. About 7 years ago, Bedford-Stuyvesant the residents wanted to downzone the entire community, right? We don't want any density at all, nowhere. And we begged them for some exemptions along the commercial corridors where we thought we could build some mixed income housing. But it was basically just personal trust that got us that because they didn't believe that increased density would benefit them. Our argument was low density is going to mean higher prices for you, right? Yeah. You know, higher home prices, higher apartment prices. If we don't increase the supply of housing and in a mixed income context, it's going to be increased pressure. You can't shut the market out. You can't close the curtains. And so we got some limited exemptions from the downzoning. But my point is that we were arguing with the residents about this because they just are. The second thing I would say is that this current fear, where people, for example, in Brownsville, East New York, the arguments are any new production has to be for people at their current median income or their current income, right? So the community has a median income that's well below the citywide average. And what's sad to me is it almost implies that they don't see themselves moving up and they don't see their children moving up. Let's just build more and let's just preserve things the way they are. And I just think that as we argue for economic mobility, we have to put some flex in there for people to grow economically and still live in the same community. We don't want to build a structure that will exclude people as they make the progress that we hope for.
I'll try to make some quick comments on this. And I agree with my panelists that there is a lot of distrust, right, around the process of gentrification. And where does that stem from? It depends how far you want to go back. But let's just not go too far back. Let's stick to the 20th century. And we had the old urban renewal, right, in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Most of the money that was coming from the federal government was going to cities to raise mainly African-American neighborhoods. And there was a tremendous amount of displacement. Also, during that process, very few black-owned businesses made any money off that. And, you know, I've kind of coined this period from the 1990s on to the present, the period of the new urban renewal, right? We have Hope 6 going, we've got all these programs that are helping to stimulate the redevelopment of impoverished areas. And we are having some displacement, but we also need to think about the process is a little bit different, right? So in Harlem, there are a bunch of black real estate developers who are making a lot of money. In Washington, D.C., we have the same thing. We have a black developer. His name is Chip Ellis. He redeveloped the Howard Theater. He did Progression Place up on 7th Street. Some of you know this context. He made millions of dollars off the redevelopment. There's Industrial Bank, black-owned bank on U Street. They are doing pretty well these days. And there's Rick Lee. He's got a flower shop up there. He doesn't care about white or black. He cares about green. And he is able to sell his flowers to a lot of people who've moved into that community. That community used to be 90% in the Shaw U Street area, African American. It's now 55% white. But there are some black businesses that have been able to make money off this new urban renewal phase. And that's part of the story we need to tell. I mean, you may not agree with that because we're talking about low and moderate income people benefiting. But you know, middle and upper income African Americans have benefited more during this urban renewal period than the prior one. And that is helping to reach greater wealth equity in this current redevelopment context.
That's very interesting. And do you document that in your book?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, that was just a book plug from me, since I liked getting the real stories on the ground, and that's actually some of the distinction of thinking about both where the engines came from and whether any of the benefits fall into a group that was actually not helped during the last.
May I say one more
Yes.
thing? So Brooklyn is a borough of about 2.4 million people, maybe a little bit more, that's going through a tremendous resurgence. There are billions of dollars being invested in Brooklyn, housing and commercial development. And I guess what I see in terms of equity is that, for example, in the downtown area, which is right adjacent to the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge, and probably no more than a 20-minute walk away from Manhattan over the bridge, there are no minority developers, right? And so I guess my point is equity to me means not just developing, and I'm not trying to contradict you, it's not just developing, having minority developers in developing minority or historic low-income communities, but across that whole range of opportunity that exists in a place like Brooklyn. A second thing is that very few people are talking about integrating downtown Brooklyn, which is definitely going to be a high opportunity neighborhood, right? The focus right now is on how do we balance things in these historic low-income communities, and it makes the communities feel like test tubes, like social test tubes. The experiment ought to be across the whole region or the whole city. In New York City, it is a city filled with wealth, and most of the focus on how to get these kinds of issues solved is taking place in the place where we have been traditionally experimenting. Not now. Okay, you can say, well, the people in these other places are not going to tolerate this. But that is exactly the point, that we've got to find a way, if we're really going to be equitable, to spread the burden or spread the opportunity across the whole city.
And I think that's your point I'm thinking for you regionally. So we have now seen the flash of Q&A signs twice. So I am going to tee up for the audience, and we can weave in final conversations in response to questions both from here at the audience, and if you're going to speak, I'm going to ask you to stand and go to the microphone, because we have people on the webcast and they won't be able to hear your questions. And if you're on the webcast, you can tweet or email your questions, and we'll be toggling between the two. Thanks. And please introduce yourselves.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mikael Rojas, and I'm with a civil rights firm called Relman, Dane & Colfax here in Washington, D.C. I think the presentation has focused on sort of normative ideas and normative policy prescriptions for gentrification and displacement. But I wanted to ask a question to HUD and also to the city of San Francisco, or the representatives of both of those places, about the obligations to do something about gentrification and displacement. Just last year, I think, HUD issued the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. And part of the rule requires cities and communities to look closely at neighborhoods with rapid demographic, we're talking ethnic change, and do something about it if they receive federal funding. Mr. Kelly talked a little bit about San Francisco, about the entire city being a target for gentrification. but it's clear if you look at the data that certain neighborhoods are more targeted than others. And I think the Mission District is arguably ground zero for that in San Francisco. The Mission District is described as the Latino heart of San Francisco. And in 2000, it was 60% Latino. In 2013, it was 48% Latino, and the city's own projections expect the Latino population of the Mission District to be down to 31% by 2025. So I'd like to ask, I guess, Dr. O'Regan about
Again, I'm the HUD
rule.
official on the panel, yes.
And about what
Yes.
the AFH rule requires in this situation, and I guess what San Francisco is doing about it.
So actually, you've just stolen what was going to be my summary comments at the end, but it's perfect to put them here. So as I was listening to to the panel, I kept coming back to AFFH, right? So in AFFH, we have you are required when you're doing your assessment of fair housing to engage meaningfully with the community, to look at the pictures of where, what your community looks like and do an assessment that is meant to have strategies that are really going to move the needle on economic and racial segregation. And the process part of it is key for what you're likely to come up with. We're pushing for two things that will be critical, which is to think broader, hopefully a regional look, and you actually must do a regional analysis, even if you're doing a separate AFH, and to think beyond housing, because if you think about the strategies that are going to make movement here, there are many more levers that you need. And so I think that framework is one in which gentrifying neighborhoods jump out of the data. It's like, oh my God, there's a win. We already have movement of creating an area of opportunity. We can secure housing in there. What are the things that we want to do? And so my hope is that the AFFH frame is ideal for exactly this issue, and it's one of the reasons the Secretary wanted to be having a national dialogue on gentrification and community change this year, and why it's one set of tools that we're developing in the Prosperity Playbook, so that as communities are addressing this, they've got a set of things that other communities are talking about trying and do. So these are meant, there's a little this actually means behind the madness of all of this happening at the same time. So I'm very optimistic about the timing of these. I don't know where San Francisco is in its planning process.
Sure. Well, we're in the middle of it, and to some degree earlier, and I do appreciate the reference to the Mission District, and I had that in my longer comments, but had
And it
to
was
cut
one of
it
the
short.
questions I was supposed to ask, so thank you for helping.
And for those in the audience who may not be as familiar with it, it's for at least the last 2 or maybe 3 generations has been really the heart of the Latin American population in San Francisco. Originally an Irish working class district, which transitioned earlier in the century, last century. And what's interesting there is, and I agree with your inference, and we're trying to do exactly what you're talking about, but it cuts against some traditional thinking about, for example, use the word segregation, where, and that's why I mentioned there's a cultural aspect to this, which is neighborhoods like that want to feel intact. That is to say, they're not being dispersed to the 4 winds or to the corners of the region. And so developing culturally sensitive strategies that are not just blind to race and culture is really an important piece. We're not simply looking at income and number of housing units. And that's why the focus we've taken is on this, what we're calling the Mission 2020 action plan, which is a much more kind of immediate strategy kind of plan, working directly with the community leaders, most of whom are Latino leaders recognized in the community, representing both businesses and a whole series of other groups, some housing related and some others just community generalists. And that's why a number of strategies have bubbled up that don't necessarily fit in predefined boxes. And so we are pushing the limits there, because some of that is simply making sure there's an adequate supply of housing for the income levels that you said referred to, that also tend to matrix well with the cultural aspects. And so that's kind of the focus of that strategy. We're really trying to dial in to that neighborhood. And I have to say, it's a challenge, because many of the housing advocates, not necessarily Latino, some are in that represent that issue are doing exactly what you described a moment ago around preservation. That is to say, if we just eliminate the production of any market rate housing project in the neighborhood, even if that comes with 20 or more % of affordable housing as an inclusionary, that's a bad thing, because even with the affordable, any market rate unit in their eyes has a gentrifying effect and will raise rents. And that's particularly acute because under California law over the last couple of decades, the rent control laws have been severely weakened. And let's face it, that has been the largest reservoir of affordable housing for people is rent-controlled housing. So it's a very dicey set of issues that we're trying to address there.
Can I just
Who
add one?
wants to weigh in?
I want to add one thing, may I? It's gone to the extreme where in communities where the median income is, say, 40%, they don't want housing at 80%. Right? Like people who make $60,000, they're considered gentrifiers. And I think and that's just fear-based, right? There's like no, in my view, there's no rationality to that. So the mandatory inclusionary housing plan that was recently adopted by New York City was vehemently proposed wherever people were marginally above what the current median income was.
Okay, I'm going to turn to an email question.
Well, actually, we're from Twitter. Eric Yost writes, "Where are those displaced going, and what is happening to the communities where where those folks are moving?"
It's a good question, and I'll let you speak in your communities. I've just seen something interesting, but it's only as an abstract, so I haven't had the chance to see the research underneath it, that is unbundling where households go when they leave neighborhoods experiencing great economic gains. And it looks as though this may be one of the ways in which you say really differential trajectories. So it's the low-income households who are leaving these neighborhoods that gain tend to get a bump down. They're going to even lower-income neighborhoods. And so even if it's the same rate of turnover, it may be a particularly negative outcome for them because they're landing someplace that is not the same neighborhood characteristics they had before, whereas the medium, the moderate level, and higher income actually tend to go to neighborhoods of a higher income level. And so that's sort of an interesting pathway, different than just looking at overall turnover rates. I think in San Francisco, you're seeing they're going very far away.
Yeah, that's true. I wish we had better information on that. We really need to get it. What we do know at a gross level is that the vast majority of people leaving San Francisco are leaving for other parts of the Bay Area and Northern California, so it's not as if they're moving across the country. With regard to segregating out by income where people are going, we don't have great information on that, but anecdotally, what we're seeing is that they are being pushed to the farther region, perimeter of the region.
Be amazing.
And right? Exactly, and that's why the transit question comes into play, if that's the case. And it's a very disparate real estate economy. For example, within the core of the region, San Francisco prices, as I mentioned earlier, are off the map, but there are parts of Oakland that are as quick to get to jobs in San Francisco as quicker than many San Francisco neighborhoods, and yet and the prices are escalating very quickly in Oakland. It's sort of called the Brooklyn of, if we're the Manhattan, they're the Brooklyn, right? But the developers are not quite confident yet enough to build new housing in Oakland, so that's only exacerbating the question there. And so I think probably the moderate income people may be moving to the inner East Bay, but the lowest income people are probably moving further out than that. And I would just note on the Mission District question that while I mentioned the history of this being a largely Latino neighborhood, it is ground zero for the new techies moving into San Francisco. And so tensions are high. There are posters on telephone poles and in windows, "Go home, tech bro, and take your company with you," and that kind of thing. So it's very, very high tension, which is why I mentioned the sort of notion of having some kind of not only a community strategy, but some community healing that has to go on here.
Very interesting. Okay. You've been waiting patiently to ask your question.
Hi, my name is Pedro Morales, and I come into the gentrification experience from many perspectives. I went to urban planning school, graduated in the 80s, And I went right into the East Village as a developer. I bought properties in the East Village very, very inexpensively. In Bed-Stuy, I bought on Kosciuszko Street, in East Harlem, in the South Bronx, and I continued, I made millions of dollars. As a stakeholder, a developer stakeholder, the prospect of development in these inner city areas is very, very enticing. As a developer who went to urban planning school, the idea of gentrification or displacing families became more and more real as time went on. So what I feel like I'm listening to is an autopsy of neighborhoods, and that the language has to change. It can't be the language of change. It's dynamic. It's a process that's going on constantly. So when we spoke about micro issues or micro inequities, the old woman who has walked to the check cashing place to spend 20 minutes or half an hour online to pay her Con Ed bill is now standing at the bus stop when a kid goes by on his bicycle and pushes a button and pays his bill. And they're aware of that. So there's a tremendous disparity that can't be reached by anything. The guy who plays the numbers on the corner can't play the numbers there anymore. And there's an entire culture set around playing the numbers. That's real. I now am in Holyoke, Massachusetts, where I bought an 8-story building, and it's right next to City Hall, and I'm converting it into a condominium. People have approached me to purchase the condominiums, and nobody even knows I'm going to do that. Only my attorney knew that. And so the people that are purchasing are the people who are there, which happens to be a Puerto Rican population that I'm a part of, and their mindset is to sell as the neighborhood increases in value. So the question I have is what's being done to target developers like myself, whose mindset is driven by a profit motive and a very real, very rapid return. And I have definitely benefited from all the increase in values in all those neighborhoods over the last 35 years. I think that language has to change from strategy to imperative. And it has to be something that there are spokespersons for the people who don't have anyone to speak for them. And that the stakeholders like myself, who put a lot of money into places, need to be addressed. And I don't want to say defined, so it's sort of un-American to tell somebody you can't make money, but and a lot of it, but that you have to be able to create covenants or issues that say, look, I'm going to sell you this condominium, it's worth $100,000 today. I know in 2 years it's going to be worth $250,000. But that guy that's been in that neighborhood for 20 years and has been watching this without an avenue to make investments is going to now have access to it because he can buy it from me at $10,000 down payment. The government should be able to come in and say, there's got to be a way that we can control this because the neighborhood character will change.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a great question because real estate developers' interests are going to be key, right? I mean, most of the redevelopment that happens is a private-public partnership. And if you don't account for the way bankers are thinking and real estate developers are thinking, then it's going to be very hard for you to influence and impact the lives of low-income people in these communities. So I'm very glad that you're here and glad you brought up what you did. I tend to tell developers, look, going rate on the market for your investment is 15% rate of return. I want you to make your 15% rate of return or whether you're not going to invest. But can you make that investment and get that return and at the same time help low-income people? So could you think about, look, you think about the high-end product. Most of the people that are moving back to the city, right, this back to the city movement, are young millennials who are educated but also want to be around diversity. Right? They're not moving to Georgetown. They're not moving to Foggy Bottom. They're moving to Shaw U Street. They're moving to 8th Street. They're going to move over to Anacostia because they want to be in a diverse environment. So as a real estate developer, isn't it in your interest to do some inclusionary zoning to keep it diverse? I would think that would help maximize the profits. If you look at Penn Quarter in Washington, D.C., the going rates compared to 14th Street, it's cheaper now to live in Penn Quarter. Why is that? Maybe because Penn Quarter is a little sterile and a little homogenous, and also it's the Verizon Center. It's not a real authentic neighborhood. So thinking about how to keep authenticity in these neighborhoods will actually maybe increase your profit margin over time. So I'll end with that because I'm sure other people have some things to say about it.
I'd love to hear ways in which, if you have strategies on the ground for this critical group whose investment decisions are key drivers in what's actually going to happen in these neighborhoods.
Well, in New York, we just, as I said, adopted a mandatory inclusionary housing proposal. I think the challenge in New York was to structure something that didn't deter housing developers, but incentivize them. And there was a lot of wrangling around which income groups would benefit from the would be included in the market rate housing. So I think I agree with Derek. That's one vehicle, and if it's properly constructed, it should incentivize folks. It's a difficult question for me to answer. I think it's a great question for that reason, because it has been a difficult balance. One thing I will say, and maybe this is just too simple. See, I see the housing of low-income people as a societal obligation. And what worries me is when we, for example, go to homeowners in historically low-income communities who are poised to take advantage of the market and say, oh, you can't do that because you'll be hurting your people. And I think that's very unfair, because what we're talking about is people who for decades have had a lower rate of return on their investment than other people, and now that their community is facing this pressure, we're saying, oh, but you have a special obligation not to be an American like everybody else. That's not right. So I think that as a society, we need to not shift the responsibility to any particular group, whether it's a developer, whether it's a longstanding homeowner, but we need to just, as they say, I don't want to say man up, but
Thank you. Appreciate the sense.
we need to people up and and pay the cost as a society. And of course, there's no political, agreement on this, and that's what makes it very difficult.
Great. I know we have one more question.
Well, I would just say that I agree. There are some things that can be done for low and moderate income homeowners that are more on the financial side. They require some underwriting on the part of government, but low interest home loans for repairs and maintenance, so forth, upkeep, as well as sleeping seconds for more major work is one way to, or even to get a first home for neighborhood residents. But I think on the larger production of new housing side, our primary tool there in terms of engaging developers is really through the inclusionary zoning ordinance. And often there's a standard level in San Francisco set by a ballot measure, actually, when the economy was not quite as strong. At 12% of all units on site need to be affordable to low and moderate. That's contemplated. We have raised that in areas where we have upzoned. So where there's an increase of potential for the developer, they can raise that percentage. And we're looking in one neighborhood where we're doing some pretty substantial upzoning to 20-25% even. So I would say that's one tool that the development community actually responds to pretty well, because we model that based on pretty standard pro formas and market information.
Okay, I can see that I have less than 2 minutes and one person who's patiently asking a question. You may not get much of an answer in that time, but
Sure,
you can
I'll
at least pose your question.
I'll do what I can. I'm probably a case study in the underlying parts of your work. I'm from that long-forgotten group of Gen Y folks. I am born and raised in Brooklyn, in Flatbush. I lived there for 32 years. Then I moved to San Francisco, 2009 2010, and I'm a permanent resident of DC. I work in the environment. So
we're going to interview that.
Yeah. My question is basically around the idea that gentrification seems to pit older residents who are plagued by a lack of infrastructure and resources against, and financing, to be fair, infrastructure, financing, resources, against newer residents whose very presence seems to signal the resurgence of all the things that they've been lacking. I am very interested in comprehensive strategies coming from the government sector that address the adversarial relationship that's created as a result of that and considers the role of environmental concerns, because the government's really the only entity that's at every level of this decision making, and long before residents are complaining about what's happening to them, the government has signed off on permits doing the very same thing. So I'm just curious about comprehensive strategies, because I'm not sure piecemeal is working, at least from my experience. Thanks.
Wait.
Sure.
Stay up there, because I have one question of you. Which area did you like better, Brooklyn, San Francisco, or Washington, D.C.?
Wow, Flatbush forever. I think I lived in the Sunset. My issues with San Francisco was that once you are out of your circle, no, you can't make friends because you're never going to see each other. So I have to say that of the three, I love Brooklyn and I live in D.C. Sorry, San Francisco.
We'll do what we can to get you back. I think that's primarily what I was talking about earlier, about having holistic strategy.
I think the panel is completely agreeing with you, and so you're going to get to be the actual summary comments of this, which is that obviously we need comprehensive strategies, not just across more than housing, but more than one set of neighborhoods. And you went to the adversarial component as one of the places that we need to go, which we've been hearing about, and I think that's sort of an insight from today's panel for me for thinking about the policies, and specifically the idea that it's the government's obligation. So rather than it being who's going to take the hit on not making their profit and return, we need the political will, right, for the government to be leading. This is a social compact for inclusive communities, and it needs to start with the only entities we have that have a right for claiming that social compact and an obligation for that social compact. And I will say AFFH is a statement of the collective obligation for at least what we control here at HUD. You do business with us and resources. You need to be moving your communities to be inclusive on gains, and that's a requirement that comes with this engagement. I'm going to end with that pitch on AFFH and comprehensive. Thank you. I want to ask you all to thank our panelists for what for me is a great way to spend the afternoon.